Hi, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. Today, we'll be sharing with you the 10 steps to conducting webinars, which is the first series of webinars presented by Bob Rogers of Chesapeake Digital Solutions. Our presenter, Bob Rogers, started and ran a government contracting business for 30 years, which he sold in 2015. He was number 250 of Inc. magazine's top 500 rankings of the fastest growing privately held companies in the United States. He's won over $100 million in government contracts, and WSI Digital Solutions is his fifth business. He has a BS in engineering from the United States Air Force Academy, an MBA from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, and is an OPM graduate of Harvard Business School. He was also the Dean of Business for Stratford University and an adjunct professor at Northern Virginia Community College. You can get more advice and tips on social selling and digital marketing by following Bob Rogers on LinkedIn, and I will turn it over to him now.
Thank you, MJ. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Hope you all are doing well. And thank you for attending today's session on the 10 steps for conducting webinars. Very important subject in the digital marketing world. And the first question you want to ask yourself is why? Why do you want to give presentations on webinars? Well, there are three reasons that I would suggest. First of all, you want to educate your audience. You want to make sure your audience understands what your expertise, which is the second point, is, and how it relates to how you can solve their problems. This in turn will lead to the third reason, which is it will gain visibility. Webinars and public speaking, in-person speaking are one of the biggest two ways in which you can raise your profile above your competitors in order to be recognized and to increase your visibility and therefore your ability to convert new business. Speaking of which, when we talk about converting new business, we need to flip the script a little bit here and look at it from the point of view of your target audience. Your target audience has what's called a buyer's journey. HubSpot, I took this slide from HubSpot, which is one of the leading inbound marketing consulting firms in the world. And they have what they call a three-stage process for the buyer's journey. It's awareness stage, the consideration stage, and the decision stage. Awareness stage is where the potential buyer becomes aware of who you are. This is the first time they come in contact with you. The second is the consideration stage. So now that they know who you are, they're going to start looking at different other options or look around and compare you against them. Yeah, the world has flipped upside down. Now people know more about you when they come to you than before. When I first started in business a long time ago, we knew more as a seller of services, we knew more about what we did and we had to tell the customer. Now the customer can go out and find out everything there is to know about you online, through social media, and they pretty much know who you are before they make a decision. And then they're going to make a decision on who you are in the last stage. So when you use a webinar, what you're trying to do is you're probably in the first two stages. This is the first time someone's ever heard of you, or it might be a situation where they've already come in contact with some of your social media or your email or anything that you've already done digitally, but now they get a chance to see you in action and find out how much you actually know or what advice you can really provide them. And so the consideration stage might be a step, a push in the next direction toward decision after you see a webinar. So either awareness or consideration stage. So let's get right into the 10 steps. The first step is to define your target audience. So you want to begin with a clear understanding of your target audience. Just like in your business, you have a target audience. So I would assume that most people who do webinars are targeting the same audience that they're targeting for their business. But then you want to drill down from that and be more specific. So inside your target market for a if it's a company or a government agency or an association, whatever your target market is, what role does the individual play in that organization? Are they a C-suite person, meaning are they a chief executive officer or a chief information officer, or are they a chief business development officer? In my case, I serve, my target audience is government contractors and professional services firms. So I'm always looking to target the CEOs and the chief development officers, the people who are looking for business, to help them be visible on the internet. And again, the industry that you serve will determine what your target, who you're targeting. If you're targeting government agencies, maybe you're going to be targeting the project manager's office, or maybe you're going to be targeting the small business office, or maybe you're targeting the contracting office. All these have to be taken into consideration to slant your pitch toward that audience. Selecting your topic. So you want to pick a topic that's at the intersection of your audience's biggest challenges and your ability to solve those challenges. So a process that is widely used to make most decisions, or a lot of decisions, is first brainstorm the idea, vet your list of topics, slim them down, test your topics against your expertise, and then draft your title. Now, the brainstorming might be a little bit more scientific than just kind of winging it. You probably want to go out and do some research on the internet. It's called secondary research, in which you're on the internet and you look at your target audience's content. You go on their website, or you try to look for articles about them, or you try to understand what their problems are through primary research, which is actually conducting a survey yourself. So this is a way, these two ways are tried, true, and tested ways of doing research to come up with topics and ideas. The third step is to choose a presenter. The presenter may or may not be you. There's a couple of things to consider here. The first thing is that are you good on camera or video? And if you're not the kind of person that's comfortable sitting in front of a camera, and believe me, none of us are born with that capability, a lot of it has to do with just practicing, just doing it over and over and over again until you get comfortable. But if you're not at that point where you are comfortable, then you may want to consider the second option, which is to get a subject matter expert, someone who does do this all the time, and to have them guest speak on your behalf. And that individual then would be not only a good source of presenting material, but also would be maybe a draw when you start advertising, which we'll talk about later. And you'd say, well, I've got XYZ expert who's going to be doing the presentation on this subject matter. And that may be a way to increase the amount of people who would attend your webinar. Step 4, take time to plan. This is always a real problem for all of us, to try to make sure that we do this right. You got to give yourself at least 3 to 4 weeks to prepare a webinar, given all the steps that we're going to go through to make sure that it happens correctly. Actually, the best way to do this is to set up for the next 6 months to a year how many webinars you're going to do and which topics you're going to do them at, and then try to stick to some kind of regular schedule. Because otherwise, you're probably going to end up saying, oh, you know, I meant to do it this month, and this month is now at the end of this month, so I'll bump it off to next month, and I'll bump it off to next month after that. And you never will end up getting your content out there and demonstrating to people what your expertise is. Day and time of the week. Midweek is always the best, Tuesday through Thursday. Mondays are always a downer. It's a bad time to have a webinar, and Fridays are tough to get attendance. Most people are probably looking for ahead for the weekend. Duration, try to keep your presentations under 30 minutes, or if you have to go to 60, that's fine. But most people today are keeping on a 30-minute schedule. And if you run a webinar for an hour or so, you better have a lot to talk about. And you also run the risk of losing your audience to other conflicts, which they may have. Make sure you also record your webinar and you send it out to your participants afterwards. We'll talk more about that at this point later. So the next thing is you want to select your webinar service. There's all kinds of ways in which we now video conference or connect visually, digitally. One is through video conferencing or meeting, and the other is through webinar conferencing. There is a difference. When you and I meet on Zoom, and if there is someone on this, looking at this presentation who has not been on a Zoom call, then you probably have been on another planet for the last 6 months, because I don't know of anybody who hasn't been on a Zoom call. So Zoom is a meeting platform in which you're looking to talk with one or more people. A webinar is a conferencing platform, and there you're looking to advertise your webinar. You're looking to capture information on the people who have attended your webinar, and you're looking to use that information to connect with them after the webinar. And the meeting platforms don't have that capability. The webinar platforms do. I've given you some examples here. I'm a big user of GoToMeeting, but when I do webinars, I use GoToWebinar. WebEx has the same format, so does Zoom. On24 is another very popular webinar platform. It really doesn't matter whether you use which one you use, just so long as you're comfortable with it. But I would recommend webinar format over a meeting format. So now, step 6, you're going to try to create your webinar outline. You've already figured out what your topic is. You've already figured out which platform you're going to use. So now it's time to start thinking about your outline. And you want to think systematically about this. You want to organize your presentation, and you want to uncover any gaps in your storyline. You probably want to go through it 2 or 3 times as well before you actually do it. But here's an example of an outline that I did for how to gaining visibility with your target audience. And I went to the visibility, definition of visibility, why visibility. I even had a little piece of there about introvert, because some people are introverted, and that doesn't mean they can't be successful in digital marketing or even in a webinar. And then I talked about the 5 keys of how to do digital marketing and how to be effective. And so that's kind of the macro outline, and then I went through and did all the details that were necessary to give the webinar. Step 7, promote your webinar. You want to post on your website. You want to send promotional emails out. If you have a blog, you certainly want to blog about it. And you want to use social media as much as you can. If you are a B2B, that's a business-to-business institution, company, then you want to make sure that you use LinkedIn and Twitter. They are the primary platforms for connecting with B2B. If you're B2C, business to consumer, and you have a lot of people who are consumers, you want to be on Facebook. Facebook is the largest social media platform in the world by far, but as it relates to business, B2B is dominated by LinkedIn and B2C is dominated by Facebook. And then the one thing that I think a lot of people miss is that promoting your webinar afterward is just as important as promoting your webinar before. Posting that you in fact conducted a webinar and that you had if you had some provocative questions, You could add that in one of your posts, say on the social media, or you could send back out another email blast to the same group and tell them thank you, along with a copy of the video. There's all kinds of ways in which to encourage people to engage with you again and try to drive them to your various platforms, either to your social media platforms or to your website. And if I didn't mention earlier that your website should be your highest performing digital platform, I'm going to mention it now. A lot of people think that, particularly if you're in business, with the government, and you don't have a website, you are not visible to the government buyers. Government buyers want to see websites, and they want to see capabilities, they want to see certifications, and they want to see what you have to offer them to solve their problems. Step 8, develop presentations. So I use PowerPoint. I used PowerPoint for this presentation. And or you could use Keynote, or you can use any other presentation software that you like. PowerPoint is really a great tool. I've used it for many years. But no matter what you use, here are the 4 things that I think you have to have in a presentation. First is the cover slide. The cover slide should be catching. It should be you should spend time on the graphics and the imagery of your cover slide. Make sure it has the title, the presenter, the date, and related imagery. As you go through a presentation, you want to make sure that the pictures and the images fit the subject matter that you're talking about, because there's nothing worse than someone to be distracted by a picture that doesn't match what you're talking about. So imagery is very, very important to the presentation. You heard earlier MJ come on and serve as a facilitator. She introduced me. She's told you about the topic. And when conducting the webinar, she would tell you all the instructions on how to ask questions. We would have poll questions. We'll get into that a little bit later. But she would do all of those things. And it helps to have a facilitator to conduct a webinar. It gives it a more professional look, and it gives the audience a better experience. Your slides shouldn't have more than 3 to 4 points on them. The most important thing, however, is to show a lot of white space. You'll notice on my slides, you'll see lots of white space around. That makes the content that you want the eye to go to stand out. If it's cluttered and has a whole bunch of things around it, it gets more difficult and harder for the listener or the viewer to comprehend. And then in your concluding slides, you want to have you give time for questions and you give your contact info. You want to make sure people know how to get a hold of you after the presentation. Okay, so here we are. We're ready to conduct our webinar. Lights, camera, action. So again, facilitator presenter is what I'm recommending. I think that's the best way to go. Your facilitator should record the session. She should also, or he should also, look at the chat for questions. It might be a situation where, in my case, most of my webinars, I will pause for a moment, and then the facilitator will come in, MJ will come in and say, well, we have a question here, a question there, and I'll fill the questions right there. And they'll come through the chat, or they'll come through the question box. And so the 2 of us play off each other and make it smooth. That way I can concentrate on delivering the presentation. I'm not looking away from the screen trying to figure out what the chat says and having these awkward pauses. Make sure you prepare and practice and rehearse your presentation, and get on the line and get on there 30 minutes before the presentation. Make sure your slides work well, everything's working well before you get started. Close all the other applications on your computer, turn off your phones, make sure that your poll questions are set up. What are poll questions? They're what I would call icebreakers. They're questions like, how many years have you been in business? How many people do you have in your firm? How much do you know about the subject matter? And it's sort of a multiple choice answer type thing. It also gives the participants who are in the webinar the feeling that, oh, well, I'm not alone. I'm in this category and there's other people in the same category as me. So it's just one of these things that I think gives them a chance to also engage with you, because we are in a sort of, and we're not in a sort of asynchronous, we're in an asynchronous mode here. And so this is a way to cut down on the barrier of the screen. And then lastly, and just as important as every other thing I've talked about, is follow up. Make sure if you do use webinar software, most webinar softwares have a component where you can record the video conference. Excuse me, the webinar conference. So that's the way to go, as opposed to a meeting format where there's not necessarily the capability to do that. And once that file is downloaded, most webinar platforms have capture information such as who actually opened the email and looked at it, who then, after they opened the email, actually registered, and then who actually showed up. And as you can imagine, maybe you had 50 people that opened the email, and you had 30 people that showed that excuse me, 40 people that actually signed up, and then 30 people actually attended the webinar. So this is the kind of information you want to know. The webinar platform that I have also gives me information on how I did, who was paying attention, who wasn't, what are the questions that were conducted. This is all information that I keep and I use for follow-up presentations. So those are the 10 steps that we go through. And there's always at the end, make sure you have the question slide, which I'm showing you here. This is a typical one where it shows you how to get a hold of me, and it gives you my email address down here. And then if I am going to be talking with my audience, I'll probably put this slide up, which gives you all the contact information and how to stay connected to me. And I would give what they call to action. I would ask people to call and reach out to me and let me know what they thought of the presentation, or if they want a demonstration or more information about the subject matter, please give me a call. Well, I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been fun for me to put this together and to give it to you. I hope to see you digitally online at one of my other webinars, or maybe you'll just reach out to me. In any event, I wish you have a great day. God bless, and thank you for attending the webinar. Appreciate it.